While we play, there's been a murder, a collaborative card game of death and deduction. So we play the game mostly the way the rules are as written, but I will point out a few things that we do to streamline gameplay a bit. And I'm going to also discuss a couple cards in particular because, again, for ease of play, for ease of teach, and for consistency, for overall consistency of the rule set, there are certain cards that we treat certain ways. But let's go over, if you're unfamiliar with the game, in this edition that I have, you have a card stack that looks like this. You have a character or card reference. Cards are characters, so it's a card/character reference. And there are blue and red cards. And the way in the rule book, and the way the game is played, the object of the game is it's a collaborative game. And for like two to six players, and realistically, we have played it at all. We've played it at all those player counts. I'm sure it says somewhere on the box I know it's 2 to 6 players, but I always like to point out where on the box it says so. Anyway, sorry. It is a 2 to 6 player game. I'm blind at the moment. I can't find where it is on the box. But one thing that is important to do, and this is per the rules, but I want to point out why it's important, because before you can change rules or abandon rules or make replacement rules and stuff like that, you should always understand what is the intent and purpose of the rules as written. And sometimes you intentionally modify that intent, but you don't want to unintentionally undermine that intent. So what it will tell you is that this actually plays up to 8 players, and we have played up to 8 players. So it's a 3 to 8 player game. Okay. But 3 to 4 players do this, 5 to 8 players do this. Okay. So the thing that's important here in the rules to pay attention to in the setup is that if you've got less than 5 players, you need to remove cards 19 through 24. And the numbers are right here. And I will show you why that is important. So we would literally go through here, and anything that's 19 or above we remove, everything else we keep. Those are the cards we're playing with. In a 3 to 4 player game, you won't be playing with these cards. Okay? The reason why this can be important is that a win condition for this is a fully collaborative, cooperative game, and the object of the game is to catch the murderer, this card here, before one of two things happens. You all lose the game one of two ways. If the murderer ever ends up in the hand with the witness, okay, the witness literally says, if you ever hold this card and the murderer card at the same time, reveal both immediately and everyone loses. Okay? That is the effect of the witness. Is if one player is ever holding both of these cards at the same time, they must reveal them and the entire table loses, right? So you want to, a key point of the game is to keep that from happening through mechanisms I will go through. But another way you can lose is after cards have been dealt out. Okay, so at the beginning of the game, everybody's going to receive 2 face down cards. Okay, so let's say we're doing a 4-player game. We shuffle. I'm going to go through the rest of the setup here in a second and show you what we do before we deal out cards. But talking about how you win or lose, everybody starts with 2 cards in hand, but the rest of the cards are a draw deck. And at the start of a player's turn, but also per some card effects, cards can get drawn from this draw deck. If at any point in time someone needs to draw a card from the draw deck and there's no card for them to draw because the deck has been emptied and they've all been discarded, then everybody also loses because thematically your investigation has taken too long, so the murderer has managed to escape and get away. This is why, going to the intent of the game, this is why when you have fewer than 5 players, when you have 3 or 4 players, that's why you need to remove these cards from the deck, because these cards being in the deck makes the game last more rounds. And when you have fewer players, it would make the game last more rounds. It would give you more time to solve it and catch the murderer before he got away. And that's against the spirit of the game. It would make it too easy. And if it's too easy, not challenging enough, then it wasn't fun because there was really no point in playing because you were almost guaranteed to win. When you have 5 to 8 players, you put these cards in the deck because there are more players. They're going to have cards in their hand. There's going to be more people drawing cards. There's still going to be fewer total rounds overall because there's more people amongst which those cards are being distributed. So you want the cards in the deck in that case so that the game doesn't end too quickly so that you have a chance of winning. Okay? So that's an important thing to understand about setup. First, step 1, based on your player count, it really is important to either include these cards, 18 through 24, or remove them. Must do that. Secondly, it's going to tell you that blue cards are action cards, and red cards are effect cards. Okay, or they're effect cards is what they are. That's the proper terminology. And the difference is that action cards must be played in order for their text to take effect. The butler in my hand is not doing anything while it is in my hand. I'm reading it, I see what it would do, but it hasn't done anything yet. It gets to be my turn. On my turn, I'm going to play a card. That is how turns work. At the start of your turn, if you have less than 2 cards, you draw up to 2 cards. Again, everybody loses if you can't draw up to 2 cards. And then you will play exactly 1 card. If you play a blue card, you're going to read the text out loud to the table, and you're going to just do whatever the text says. In this case, the butler said, look at the top card of the draw deck, announce the name and function to the room, and put it back on top of the draw deck. So literally, you'd have this draw deck, you'd play this card to this card, and you go, oh, everybody, the next card is the cat. It says choose 2 other players. They swap a card of their choice with each other. Do not reveal the cards, and you put it back. You don't show it, but you honestly, because they're all cooperative, so you're never trying to trick anybody. This said, you look at it, announce its name and function to the room, put it on top of the draw deck. That's how an action card works. You play it and you do what it says. Effect cards have some sort of effect, and that effect is in play while the card is in your hand. Playing a red card on your turn, which can be an option, depending upon the red card, you read the text and the red card, the effect of the card may prevent you from playing it, like the murderer does not let you play it. Okay? But if there is not an effect that would prevent you from playing the red card, then you can play it. But all playing does is stop the effect of the red card. because once the red card is played, it just goes to the discard. But unlike a blue card, that's not when this text occurs. That's not when the effect of this text happens. That's when the effect of this text stops happening. Okay? So while this card is in your hand, because it's a red card, it's an effect card, that's when this text is in effect. So it is important whenever you get a red card, however you get it, from drawing it or someone passes you a card or whatever, you immediately read it because there might be something you immediately need to know or consider based upon its effect. And I'm going to go over a couple of those examples. But point being that in setup, they will tell you that set aside the murderer and the detective, shuffle the remaining cards. So let's say we're going to do a whole, let's say we're going to do a 6-player game, so we're going to use all the cards. That's fine, right? So, we shuffle all the rest, blah, blah, pretend I'm doing a full good shuffle here. And then it says, you slide the detective card into the deck near the bottom. So it's telling you, slide it in somewhere near the bottom, right? And slide the murderer near the top. Okay? That is near the top. Okay. That's rules as written. Okay? And then you deal each player 2 cards so that they will, and you're going to randomly pick someone to start the game. You don't want to pick based upon someone looking at their hand and going, I should go first. You're just going to randomly pick someone to go first after everybody has received their 2 cards. When everybody's received their 2 cards, they should look at them, because if there's a red card, they might need to do something immediately based upon the text of that red card. Blue cards, they should be also reading, but there isn't anything immediate they need to do until it is their turn and they decide to play that card. What we do a little differently from rules as written is especially when teaching a game to new players, especially if it's a player that is somewhat new to the hobby. Doesn't mean they've never played a card game or board game before. It just means that, they're maybe not someone who has a collection of a couple hundred games like you do, or I do, or whatever, right? So if they're an individual who you feel would benefit, from specificity in rules rather than vagueness in rules, you'll notice that saying slide the detective card into the deck near the bottom of the deck, and the murder card in the deck near the top. Near is a kind of a vague term. Does near mean last 2 cards, last 10 cards? I mean, this deck, right? What's near? What's near, right? So the way we play, whether we have new players or not, it just works to play this way, and it removes the vagueness. I will find it again. Okay, we're going to take the murderer, and we're going to get the detective. So regardless of whether we're playing with, 3 players, 4 players, 5, 6, 7, 8 players, it doesn't matter. Remove the cards that we need to remove based upon player count. But then I'm going to give this deck a shuffle, and I'm going to take player count times 2 minus 1 cards. What that means is let's say we're going to do, because I'm using the full deck, let's say we're going to do a 6-player game. That would be player count times 2, so everybody would get 2 cards to begin with. That's going to be 12 cards. But I'm going to make sure this murderer is one of those 12 cards. So what I'm actually going to do is count out 11 cards. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Shuffle, or I'll give this to someone else at the table, because we've got 6 players. Someone else can be doing some shuffling. I don't have to do all the work, right? So I hand this off to them. They do a shuffle. They're going to deal 2 cards to each of our 6 players. What this guarantees is that we know going into the game, into the start of the game, we know that someone sitting at the table already has the murderer card. That is important because the way to win the game is we can only win the game if the murderer ends up in the same hand with the informant. It's kind of the opposite rule of the witness. We lose the game if the murderer ever ends up in the same one player's hand with the witness. Well, conversely, we automatically win if the murderer ever ends up in the same one person's hand with the informant, because the informant then informs on the murderer, as opposed to the murderer being able to kill the witness. That's the difference. So in order for us to even, or we have to be able to find the murderer with the detective. So we can't even win until the murderer is in play. The murderer has to be in somebody's hand before we can even start down the path of trying to win. So by doing it this way, rules say put the murderer near the top of the deck. We just make sure that the murderer is in somebody's opening hand. Now you can't just freely table talk in this game. You can only basically say things that cards let you say. And there's a card called the Gossip that says, oh, you can talk about what's in your hand now, you can talk about cards that you've seen previously, and you can theorize with other players. You can strategize and theorize. You can say, I think if there's a situation where blah, 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 we should do whatever. But what you can't say is, I have such and such card in my hand, we should therefore do this. That's too much table talk, right? So, but without table talking, we know by doing it this way, by doing the setup this way, that someone has the murderer. They can't declare that they have the murderer, but we know that someone does. So we can work towards trying to deduce who that player is, in which player's hand that murderer is. I'm looking at my cards. It's not me, ergo I know it's one of 5 other players. We know that the murderer is not, still in this deck because we vaguely put it near the top and it just wasn't near enough to the top to come out. No. We made sure it's in the opening hand. That's one thing we do differently from the rules as written. Another thing we do differently is also putting the detective near the bottom is kind of vague. So at the same time we're doing this, I will take the bottom 4 cards, and again, it doesn't matter, really how thick the deck is, because if we weren't playing with 6 players, we would have fewer cards, but we'd also have fewer hands that are being dealt out. So we take the bottom 4 shuffled cards, take the detective, and give them to someone else, and shuffle these, and make these the bottom 5 cards of the deck. So all we've done is said that instead of being near, which is vague, that the detective is guaranteed to be one of the bottom 5 cards of the deck. It's important to have the detective come out later because he's one of our 2 win conditions. The detective, when played, says, so if it ever ends up in someone's hand and on their turn, they're able to play it, says choose a player. They must discard a card. If they discard the murderer card, everyone wins. They cannot discard the murder card unless it is their only card. So the detective has to pick someone else when they play, or the person playing the detective, they have to pick someone else at the table. Presumably, someone who is only holding 1 card because they played a card their last turn and it hasn't been their turn yet again, so they're only holding 1 card. And that 1 card is happens to be, because we've used our deductive reasoning to determine. So let's say this player is sitting over here. I'm sitting over here and someone else plays the detective. And they should, before playing the detective, hopefully they've deduced that I'm sitting over here holding the murderer. And the murderer card literally says, if a card tells you to pass, show, discard, or swap cards, you cannot choose the murderer unless it is your only card. You cannot play or discard this card unless it is the only card you have. So, I'm sitting over here, I've been holding this card, they've been watching me draw a card at the beginning of my turn, so I have 2 cards, play a card that isn't this card, and they see that happening a few times, or they've gotten clues from other people in other valid ways per card effects to deduce that I'm the one presently holding the murderer. So they played their detective, They tell me to discard my one and only card, and in this case, I can because it is my only card, and because it is the detective making me discard it. That is the other way we can win, right? We can win if the murderer is in the same hand with the informant. There's also a card called the imposter. Do not confuse that with the informant or the witness. He is neither. One of these cards over here. So we can win if one player is holding both of these cards. The informant card actually literally says that. If you ever hold this card and the murder card at the same time, reveal both immediately and everyone wins. So early game, you know the detective is near the bottom of the deck, right? And it's important that the detective be near the bottom of the deck because otherwise the game would probably be too easy, especially since we know the murderer is in someone's starting hand of cards. But if the detective is guaranteed to be in the last 5 cards, then this incentivizes 2 things. First is that early game, we are concentrating on finding if someone has drawn in their opening hand the informant and see if we can get that card passed along to whoever we think has the murderer and win that way. Or so no one seems to have the informant and people can't just say, I don't have it, right? Or I do have it. They can't really say that normally. We, are looking for it in the top part of the draw deck here. We're hoping that it will come up. Also, at the same time, we are looking for cards in the early game that let us shuffle this deck. Like, draw 3 cards, choose one, and shuffle the rest of the deck. Because we want to shuffle this deck to try to get the detective, who's one of these last 5. We want to see if we can shuffle and get him nearer to the top so that we can draw the detective before the deck runs out. Because again, you lose if the deck runs out. So that puts tension on the game. In this setup, by putting the murderer in the opening hand, you're guaranteed the opportunity to attempt to win. Okay? To start working on attempting to win. You don't have to wait to, work on a plan to attempt to win. Your plan is identify who has the murderer. That's your initial plan because you know someone has it in their opening hand. You just hope that they didn't also, in their opening hand, unluckily also draw the witness. And that happens, and then you just restart the game. And early game, you know that you're hunting for the informant, and you're trying to also reshuffle this deck to get the detective towards the top. But the game isn't too easy because the detective isn't going to be right near the top. It's not going to be in anybody's opening hand. That's guaranteed. We know for sure no one's going to start the game with the detective in their hand because we literally put it in one of the last 5 cards randomly. And we know it's near the bottom. So we have 2 goals. Try to find the informant, or 3 goals. Identify who has the murderer, try to find the informant, and try to get this deck shuffled so that the detective will float up to the top so we can draw into the detective, if we're not going to win this way, so we can win that way, before the deck runs out. And that makes this game an actual strategic puzzle every time we play. Just by adopting those changes, those, more specific setup steps. Taking the vagueness of near out of it and putting the murderer in guaranteeing that the murderer card is in the opening hand cards that are going to be dealt out, and that the detective is randomly in one of the last 5 cards. That makes this basically a strategic, deduction-driven game every time we play, and that's the way we prefer to play this game. I want to also mention at this time, as part of the teach, I want to mention several cards that are worthy of note. I want to mention the gossip. Especially when you're teaching this game to new players, there are 2 cards that I think are useful to discuss. You tell them the difference between blue cards and red cards, for sure. And I'm going to include the monkey in this. I'm going to talk about the monkey as well. Okay? I'm going to also say something about the witness. I'm thinking of more things to say as I sit here, and that's fine. So, here's the thing. These are all effect cards, but they're important effect cards to let especially new players know about. Because again, the witness is one that no one wants to really draw. No one wants to draw the witness or have it in their hand, because there's no way that the witness can ever do us any good. The witness is literally only a lose condition because it can end up in the same hand with the murderer. So I want new players in particular who don't already know to be on the lookout for, if you get the witness and you have the opportunity on your turn, if you're looking at 2 cards and you allow to play either of them, meaning, if it's a blue card, play it for its effect. If it's a red card, play it to get rid of it, to just discard it. You might want to get rid of the witness. But I'm going to do this teach before we deal out cards. I'm not going to say, hey, do you have the witness? Oh, you do, you should discard it. I'm going to say in the teach, before we deal out cards, if you ever see the witness and you have the opportunity to discard it, please do so, right? Because, again, the witness, if they're holding the witness and they play a different card instead, another player at the table may not realize that they have the witness and may do something that causes cards to be rotated around because of effects. And then all of a sudden, the murderer gets passed to this person who's now holding the witness, and they're like, I didn't realize I was going to get past the murderer. It's always a possibility. Therefore, don't hold on to the witness. By the same token, there are cards in here that let you discard a card. Or draw some cards from the deck and then or search the deck for a card and put it in a discard. If you can search the deck for a discard and put it in search the deck for a card and then discard it, the witness is a great candidate for that ability. Because if the witness is in the discard, that is one of 2 lose conditions that you absolutely aren't going to run into. Then now you can only lose by running through all the cards in the deck. You cannot lose by accidentally getting the witness into the hand of the murderer, because the witness is on the discard and no one's going to take it back out of the discard and give it to somebody. Okay? That's what I want to say about the witness. The monkey. This can be a little confusing. The monkey says its effect, which is an effect while it's in your hand, but new players might get confused because they're like, I don't know what to do with it while it's in my hand, and you told me I'm supposed to do the thing the red card says while it's in my hand. This is what the monkey says. You must play this card on your turn if you have it. This is a true statement. The entire time it's in your hand, that's a true statement. It's just that it means that when it gets around to your turn, this is in your hand, you must play it. That's what that is saying. Treat it at the time that you're playing it. Well, it just says treat it, but I'm telling you it means at the time that you play it, as a copy of the last action card played, and follow those same instructions. If there is no previous action card, the monkey does nothing. So what this can mean is, let's say the discard pile looks like this at the time that someone who has the monkey, it becomes their turn. If the monkey's in their hand, the monkey says you must play this card on your turn if you have it. So they have to play it. They have to play and discard it, right? And then at the time they're doing so, they're going to treat it as a copy of the last action card played. Well, the last card played is not an action card, but that doesn't mean there isn't a last action card played. There is one, it's just not the last card played, but it is the last action card played. And that's what this is really referring to. So you're going to skip past the monkey itself, you're going to skip past the aristocrat. You're going to go, oh, the last action card played was this heiress. This is why you can't really change the order of the discards, because of effects like this. And then you're just going to do the heiress ability as if the monkey was the heiress instead. That's what this is telling you is going to happen, okay? So we're going to do the heiress ability again, and great. And then, the monkey will just sit on top of the aristocrat, on top of the heiress, on top of the discard like that. And that player's turn is done. They've done the thing. That's how the monkey is played. The gossip. This card says, you must announce that you have this card when it enters your hand. So again, as soon as it enters your hand, you should be reading all your cards as soon as they enter your hand. And as soon as this card enters your hand, you have to say, I have the gossip. I just got the gossip. You must play this card on your turn if you have it. Again, just like the monkey, it's like when it gets to be your turn, you have to play it. Remember, playing a red card just means discarding it and basically not doing anything, except for we went over the monkey and how that's a little bit different. You're going to actually do something when you play the monkey. But before it's your turn and you have to play this, while you are holding this, Even if it's your turn, this applies even if you just got it on your turn. You don't have to play it immediately. You just have to play it as the card on your turn. So let's say at the beginning of my turn, I had this card already in my hand, and I drew from the deck the Gossip. I announce, because it came into my hand, I said, I have the Gossip. It says I must play this card on my turn if I have it. So I cannot play the Confident, I must play the Gossip. But I don't have to do that right this second. Because the rest of this card says, the Gossip says, while I hold it, you may talk freely about the cards in your hand and those you see and have seen. So I would tell everybody, oh, by the way, I am also holding the Confident who does blah. And I have previously in this game seen by other card effects, people, being told to reveal cards to me or pass me cards, or I pass them cards. I've had cards that I, have seen. Here's the cards I've seen, and then here's where I think they've gone, right? I know where the murderer is. Maybe the murderer is the other card in my hand. I can tell everybody, oh, okay, if I have the murderer and I draw the Gossip, I go, hey everybody, guess what? The Gossip's letting me tell you that I have the murderer. I can't show it to you, but I can tell you about it, right? That's great. But in the example, I have it with the Confident, whatever. And I say, I saw the murderer. I passed the murderer to, my friend over across the table here, right? You can tell them all the info that you know, and you probably should, right? Because it's a cooperative game. And then I have to play a card on my turn, and I must play the Gossip. Now, as soon as this is played, this effect is done. Now I can no longer talk about the card in my hand, the cards I've seen. So if someone says, oh, I missed it, I wasn't paying attention, what did you say? I go, I can't talk about my cards anymore. I no longer have the Gossip. I therefore no longer have the Gossip's effect. Okay? So that's the deal with the Gossip. I'm going to talk about the Faithful Hound. The other card I'm going to talk about is I'm going to clarify a thing with the Detective. But that's not a red card, so we're going to get to that in a moment. But the Faithful Hound. So a couple things I'll say about the Faithful Hound is there have been some errata published, some FAQs and some errata, and some other editions of this game have changed this. The Faithful Hound, many have pointed out, was intended to be a blue card, an action card, rather than an effect card. However, in this edition, it is clearly a red card. It clearly has the effect card icon versus the action card icon. Therefore, when I am teaching people, when we play this game, and especially when I'm teaching new players this game, I am not going to complicate the game for anybody by saying, oh, by the way, remember that per errata, the red-looking Faithful Hound card with the effect card icon in the corner should be treated like a blue action card instead. I'm never going to say that. I'm never going to teach it that way. I'm never going to play it that way. Here's what the Faithful Hound says. It says, everyone closes their eyes except you. Name a card. If a player is holding that card, they must raise their hand and then lower it. Then everyone opens their eyes. So that very clearly sounds like a blue card effect. It sounds like a once and done, played and do it once kind of effect, right? But because this is appearing on my red Faithful Hound card with the effect card icon, right? We play it as an effect card. But the way we play it as an effect card is it takes effect as soon as it enters my hand. So if I draw it or I'm past it or whatever, I will literally, at that point in time, at that moment in time, even at the beginning of the game, if it's in my opening hand at the beginning of the game, I'll say, everybody, hey, hold on, before anyone takes their first turn. Because this isn't costing me a turn. It's just, it takes effect when it comes in my hand. Because it's an effect card. I'll say, hey, everybody, close your eyes. Okay. If you have the murderer, raise your hand. Because at the beginning of the game, I want to identify who has the murderer, right? Later, if this comes up later in the game, I might be looking for who has the informant, who has the detective, or if I'm worried about the witness, meeting up with the murderer, might be who has the witness, right? I can ask about any card I want, but strategically, priorities are identify who has the murder, identify where the murderer is, identify where where the informant might be, so we can get those two together, identify where the detective is, if we think they're in play yet, identify the witness. Those are kind of the four main cards to try to identify with the faithful hand, in our opinion. But you play your game as you like. But the point is we do that once. It comes in my hand, I do that once. I don't keep doing it. Even though this effect is technically in effect the entire time this card is in my hand, we don't just keep doing this over and over and over again. But we did it the once when it came into my hand, and that's fine. That serves the purpose of the card, and it matches the teach that I'm going to give everybody of how red cards are played work versus how blue cards work. But if I can pass this card to someone else, if the card effect says, hey, you can pass a card, I'm going to pass this to someone else. Because then it comes into their hand, and it's the first time that it's entering their hand. So they will pause the game, tell everyone to close their eyes, except themselves, and ask them, raise your hand if you have such and such card. Because every red card takes effect for that player when it enters that player's hand. It's not once per game. It's basically, in this case, once per instance of it entering someone's hand. Likewise, if I discard this card and someone else is able to, and then I'm either able to later retrieve it from the discard per another card's effect or whatever, or someone else retrieves it and passes it to me, I might a second time during the game do this effect because it's entering my hand for the first time a second time during the game, if that makes sense. Okay, so that is how we play the faithful hand. Other groups will play this per the errata as a blue action card where you have to, it doesn't do anything until you discard it and then you do the effect and then it's done. It's fine for groups to play that way. The errata is written, there is an errata written that way, but I will never teach it this way. We will not play my copy this way because there is no reason it doesn't break the game for us and to be consistent, where all the red cards are treated the same and all the blue cards are treated the same, and we never have to remember that this one looks red and should be treated as blue. We're never going to do that. Okay. Another thing I want to point out with the detective. This is a little bit of a situation that you can run into. Let's say I have the murderer card, and I haven't been able to get rid of the murderer card the whole game, right? Because it doesn't let me get rid of it, right? I'm not allowed to pass it or show it or discard it or anything, right? Unless it's the only card in my hand. So let's say it's in the card in my hand. And let's say I draw the detective or someone passes me the detective. Well, now at the start of my turn, I have both the detective and the murderer. Well, I know that the detective wants to discard the murderer, and that is a way that we win. But, so the confusion can arise is, well, do I have to pick, when I play the detective, do I have to choose a different player other than myself to discard a card? Because that's not helpful, right? The murderer card says I'm not allowed to play it, so therefore when it's my turn, I have to play the detective. I'm really not allowed to do anything else. I have to play this detective. But who am I going to pick? Because the detective says choose a player, they must discard a card. If they discard the murderer card, everyone wins. They cannot discard the murderer card unless it is their only card. So I have to play this because the murderer says I can't play the murderer, so I have to play the detective. I have to choose somebody to discard a card, but that's not helpful to us unless it is the murderer. We don't really want the detective to discard any other card because now the detective is in the discard pile. How are we going to win if the murderer is in my hand and the detective is in the discard pile, and therefore no one else can play the detective on me? Fortunately, it's not actually a problem. And I point this out during the teach to players, depending upon the time, how brief I'm trying to be in the teach. But generally, I'll point this out to players. It says choose a player. It doesn't say choose another player. Guess what? I'm the person playing these cards. I am a player. At the point in time I play this, and it is taking effect, it is in the discard, taking effect. It is no longer in my hand. This having been played to the discard, right? Let's say this is discard. I play this as discard. I can choose any player, choose a player. I'm going to choose myself and it says they must discard a card. If they discard the murderer card, everyone wins. They cannot discard the murderer card unless it is their only card. Well, it is the only card at this point in time because I'm no longer holding the detective card. This does not count as a card in my hand. Blue cards never take effect while they're in your hand. They always take effect after they've left your hand. You play them to the discard, and then they take effect. Okay? So, that means I choose a player, myself, to discard a card. I can only discard the murder card if it's the only card in my hand. It is, we win. So, if you ever end up in a game with the detective and the murderer in one player's hand, on that person's turn, they just play the detective, choose themselves, play the murderer, and everyone wins. And there really isn't a game break issue there. But I did want to clarify that because I've had new players think that this is requiring them to choose another or a different player than themselves. And that's not the case. You can always choose yourself, and the detective does not count as a card in your hand at the time that it is doing its action. It is out of your hand already at that point in time. All right. I think that is everything I wanted to discuss about There's Been a Murderer. I think I've talked about the way we do setup, how it differs a little bit from the rules. Some of the card clarifications that you want to point out to new players here. These 5 cards in particular, I would say, are worth a brief mention, right? As well as, of course, discussing the real difference between how blue cards and red cards work. And how to lose. You lose if the murderer ends up with the witness. You lose if you run out of the draw, if you need to draw from the draw deck, and you cannot. You win if the murderer ends up in the hand with the informant, or if the detective ever is able to discard the murder card out of someone's hand at a point in time that the only card in their hand is the murder. And that is how we play There's Been a Murder. Thank you.